Okay, here's an example for assignment 4. Now, we all know by now the document looks exactly the same except for what you need to do in this assignment. So in this program, you are required to use two parallel lists for storing related information. That's very important. Don't just store random things, right? Student name and their GPA, a pet name and age, a stock name and price, something like that, something that is related. Okay, and you all have looked at the template by now. We are assignment 4. So I'm going to show you my sample. Let's start with that. And my sample keeps track of STEM majors and their corresponding salary. So my description says you'll create a more complex modular program that uses two parallel arrays or lists and has at least one loop that accesses the data. You must have at least one loop that gets the data. This program stores two columns of data, STEM major and the corresponding major's salary in two parallel arrays, or they're also called lists. So we'll say that. And then we'll look through the data and find the major with the highest salary. And I think I also find something with the lowest salary. So here is a sample run. You say, welcome to my STEM salary comparison program. Enter a list of major names and salary when prompted. And the program will display the major with the highest salary and the major with the lowest salary. So you ask them, enter major name, the user enters that. Everything in blue is what the user enters, right? Then you ask them for salary, they enter the salary. You want to add another? Yes. Now you add more and you keep on adding. At some point in time, notice if I enter an invalid salary like C, it says not a salary. Then I enter negative 10,000, that says that's also invalid. So I enter a positive number, it says, okay, do you want to do another one? We say yes, and we keep going until we say no. Then it says, okay, I'm done. And it says computer science has the highest salary. Okay, so now we'll go down and take a quick look at the design document. So identify all of the user input data types. You need a list of major names and their salaries from the user. The major name is going to be a string. And so let me say that here, a string. And the salary is going to be an int. That's all I have. Okay, list for salary. So, well, actually you need a list. I said that's not a string. So we're going to directly add it to the list. That's what I was going to do. Okay, so you have a list for major name and list for salary. That's the data type, is the list. Okay, and then what is the program output? A variable called max to hold the highest salary as an int. A variable called major max name to hold the name of the major. So you have to say computer science. That's going to be a variable. You're going to call major max name to hold that name. And a max variable to hold the salary, right? And then I'm also outputting the min, although my sample run doesn't show that, a variable called min to hold the low salary as an int, a variable called major min name to hold the name of the minor, that's my typo there, minor with the low salary. No, that's major, that's not a minor. What am I talking about? Okay, that's a major with the low salary, okay? Confuse the min with the minor there. So a variable called major min name to hold the name of the major. The program outputs a message indicating that information. That's what our sample run says here at the bottom. Okay, so I don't need any calculations, but I need a logical process to find the maximum in the list or the minimum in the list for that matter, right? So we're going to see how to do that. Now we also have different functions. So your process should explain each function in detail. This is very important. Create functions to do the following. Welcome function outputs a welcome message, a brief description of what will be asked of the user. Okay, so the first function is called major input function. It reads the major name from the user and returns it. Salary input function is where we do some data validation. Reads salary from the user, checks to see if it's a valid number, and also checks to see if the number is greater than 0. If not, it stays in the loop, in the function, until a valid number is entered. Then it goes back. Okay, so that takes care of that. Add data. Add data takes two parameters, the two lists. So this is the function that calls the major input function, gets the name and adds it to the major list. It calls the salary input function, gets the number for the salary, puts it to the salary list. So these two functions, 3 and 4, are called by function 5. And it keeps doing that. So function 5 keeps looping until the user says, I'm done entering everything. Okay. Then it goes back to whoever called it. And we'll see who's going to call it in a minute. Then we go to the analyze data, which takes these two lists again. See, add data also takes those two lists, fills it. Analyze data takes those two lists and it's going to analyze the data to see who has the largest pay. So it takes two parameters, the two lists, declares variables for min and max, loops through to find the smallest and largest salary, and finds the corresponding major name. So we also declare variables for min and max salary and min and max name. Everything is done there. And it prints to the screen. Then the main function, main declares the two lists, calls the welcome function, which is the first function that I have, function number 2, actually function, the step number 2, calls the add data function, which is number 5, and sends the two lists to it. The lists come back filled. This is very important to note. The lists come back filled. You don't need to return them. They will come back filled automatically. That's a special characteristic of the lists in Python, for that matter in any programming language. Calls the analyze data function with the two lists again as parameters, and that analyzes and prints to the screen, and we are done. And then we finally call main. Okay, so you must have all the details of what your function does. Now let's look at the program. Have a header, as always. Tell us what the header does with all your information, the description of the program, input, output, things like that. Main, we write main first. Main is just a bunch of function calls, just like my algorithm read. My algorithm says in main, I am going to declare the two lists, call the welcome function, call the add data function, call the analyze data function. That's all we should be doing in main, and that's all I'm doing here. Welcome, add data, analyze data, and the lists get created. This is how you create empty lists, and you send them to the function. So let's first send them to the add data function. By now you all know what the welcome message prints. We won't go through that. Major input, so we won't go through that. Let's go to add data because that's the one that we are starting at. Takes the two lists and checks to initialize this option variable. It says while option not equal to no, that means as long as option is not equal to no, we come here and we call major input function. Major input function, the control comes over here, the program execution essentially jumps over here to line 29 and asks the user to enter major name. It's a string, so we don't convert it to anything. Puts it into major name, returns it. When we return it, we come back here to line 53, put it into this variable called major name, and we print it just so the user knows what they entered. And then we call major salary, and major salary, we call salary input, which comes here. And here we do a few things. We declare a string called flag equals error. This is to make sure we do data validation. Okay, major salary asks the user to enter a salary. And we say while flag is equal to error. That means as long as it's equal to error, we are assuming that there's going to be an error, because if there's no error, we're going to break out of there. The error is just a string. You can set it to whatever you want, right? So we start off with error. We go in and we have a try. The try except syntax essentially checks to see if it's a number that they are entering. So we take the major salary that they enter, we convert it to an int. If it's a good integer, it will essentially come over here to this else statement. And then it checks to see if major salary is less than or equal to 0. If it is negative, it sets the flag to error. If it is not negative, that means it's a good number and it returns it. Now, if they did not enter a number here, then this will give us an error, which means it goes to the except value error. That means there's an error in the value that they entered. The flag will be set to error, and we go to major salary and we tell them this is invalid salary, enter again. So we output this thing to the user and we read the salary again. So once this except is done, it's never going to come here. It comes here only if the salary that they enter is good. After this, it goes back to the while. That's why we have a while. Okay. So then it says, oh, let me check. Is there an error? Yeah, there was an error because we hit here. Then it's going to try and read the number that they entered here. It's going to check, is that an integer? Then we follow the same thing again. So it stays in the loop as long as we set this flag to error, which means it could either be a letter that they entered or it could be a negative number. Okay. So the while try There's another way to write this while try in the slide. You can write it either one of the ways, but there's a try and accept. The try tries to make sure it's the right number. The accept executes when there's an error. The else executes when there's no error. But the else also checks to see if it's a negative number. Then we set a flag, the same flag. So the flag is the same thing that's checked, whether it's a negative number or whether it is not a number. When all is good, it returns major salary. And then we are here adding our data. The major salary gets appended, major name gets appended, major salary gets appended to the list. Then we ask them, do you want to add more? And when they say yes, we go back here and we stay in this loop until they say no, and then it comes out of there. Now, when it comes out of there, we go back to main, right here, where we called it from, right, that line 16. And these lists are now filled, okay? Then we call analyze data. Now, when you're writing code, you should try one function at a time. And you should also test to see how these functions work. So you have some print statements. They will help you, okay? Then we come to analyze data. We pass the same to lists here. And we declare our variables max. Max gets set to the first element in the list, salary. Salary of 0 or salary sub 0, square bracket 0, right? We set it to the first value. And then we take the max name and we set it to the major, which is the list of names, to its first value. Then we set min also to the first value of salary, major. These are all initializing everything to the first value, because then we're going to go through our loop. For X in range, length of salary means the length of the list, right? LEN of salary gives us the length of the list. And we go through the loop, we print the salary, and we check if max is less than that value, then the max becomes that new value. So we are essentially comparing that first number with every other number in the list. And when we find a number greater than this number, we set it to that number. And when we set that in the number, we also set the name to major max name. Then we do the same thing with min. If the number that we see is less than min, or if min happens to be greater than that number, then we say the new min becomes that number, right? And then we set the name to major min name. And when we are done with the whole list, max and min will have the highest salary and the lowest salary and their names. So if you run this, okay, so let's type in nuclear engineering. Right, nuclear, we'll have some shortcuts, major salary, something like that. Do you want to add more? Computer science, and notice how every time I add a name, it prints the name for me again. That's called echoing the input. It's called bioengineering. And let's put some amount for that and say I'm done adding. It says highest salary is 231,000, the major is computer science. Low salary is 120,000 and the major is nuclear engineering, right? So copy this code, play around with it, or write your own code, however you want to practice. It is all good to write more of this code. Take this code and add different things to it. You can break it, you can test it. That's the only way you're going to learn. So this is for your assignment 4, and this is sample. So you can use it and do your assignment 4.